Looking back on the week that was and forward to the week ahead, it's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Waiver wire, trades, roster management. To win in fantasy football, you must remember one simple rule. Never get out-hustled. It's the Fantasy Football Hustle. Here are your hosts, Brian Drake and Dwain McFarland.
It's Labor Day weekend. That means two things, everybody. Mattress sales and fantasy football drafts. How we doing, everybody? It's Brian Drake, FightingChanceFantasy.com, welcoming you in to the Fantasy Football Hustle. How you doing out there? Thanks for checking us out. We really appreciate it. And joining me, as always, is FootballGuys.com writer Dwain McFarland. Dwain, how we doing?
Good, and do not forget RSP. Come on, man.
Yeah,
Come on, Drake.
Let's get the word out there. You broke a little news here. We'll promote it. It's good stuff. You're going to be starting a second podcast. People can hear even more of your good insight with our boy Moyer.
Jay Moyer. Yes,
Yeah.
Jay Moyer. So for those of you that don't know Jay, you should immediately get to know Jay. So it's JMoyerFB. So that's his Twitter handle. And he is amazing at doing film breakdowns around running backs, receivers, tight ends, all the skills positions, but he does them just, Drake, he does them in a way that it's like, wow, in 2 minutes, I just learned what I haven't been able to learn in maybe like 5 years, or what it took me to learn 5 years about like a zone blocking scheme and what a running back's reading. So he's got, history in coaching. He also happens to be a very smart guy. And so we're going to be going a little bit deeper, on, 4, 5, 6 topics a week, different players throughout the fantasy season, where we're truly going to be going. I'll be bringing the data to the table. He's going to be coming from the film perspective, and we're going to be marrying that stuff together and just, hopefully, sharing more interesting information around football and trying to get some actionable information into people's hands around fantasy football.
But don't be swayed here, folks. The hustle isn't going anywhere. You're still going to get all your waiver wire and roster management moves and deep insights right here on the Fantasy Football Hustle Show. So keep reviewing us, keep liking us, keep sharing us with friends. Here's what we're doing tonight. We're going to go in and call this the Draft Plan 2.0. A few weeks back, we did a really, really popular show that everybody was raving about, where we dove into Dwain's draft plan. Tonight, we have to go and kind of back things out. We're going to take a macro view of the landscape, look at the ADP. We're going to see what's changed and how we need to take notice of it as we head into these crucial drafts this weekend. I know I've got my biggest draft of the year coming up this weekend. There's some big high-stakes leagues that are still going on all week long. So if you're listening to this show, you probably have a draft that you care a lot about. We're going to take care of you here. So, Dwain, let's start it out. What has changed so far? Give me this macro view. What is pounding the table, staring you in the face, saying, holy crap, this changed? The light bulbs flashing in the corner.
Yeah, so, over the last 2 weeks, we've got to watch a lot more football. We've got to read a lot more about what's going on in camp. And so we've just got more crystallization around different situations. And what that means is, other people are coming to some of the same conclusions. Many of them we may be bringing to you, ahead of the mainstream. That's what we really try to do here. But as people start to hone in on these things, the ADPs are moving around. And what we're seeing as we gain clarity, because some roles, we don't have a crystal ball. You can't always tell what's going to happen. But if you think about it at the highest level, here's what I see. There's a lot more questions at receiver for like your wide receiver 3 types and even some of the wide receiver 2s. We haven't gained as much clarity in many of those situations, or the clarity we've gained has actually been negative, right? So if we think about Dante Pettis, if we think about Christian Kirk, think about what's going on with T.Y. Hilton, those guys are all going down. We also still don't know for sure what's going on with Keenan Allen and with Amari Cooper. But specifically, thinking about some of those targets that we were aiming for in the 5th, 6th, and 7th rounds, that tier is starting to shrink. So if your plan, is going runners early, you've got to be a little bit more careful with your receivers now late, because I don't know about you, Drake, but right now with everything I'm hearing and reading out of San Francisco, I don't feel warm and fuzzy about like Dante Pettis as my wide receiver 3 if I've got to start him out of week 1, right? Whereas, a couple weeks ago, we still felt pretty good about that. Now, running backs are the opposite. So we still feel pretty much the same about the early runners. A lot of that's the same. We have had a couple of guys that have moved up. So like Chris Carson and Sony Michel, the last time we did this podcast, those were kind of like our whoopee blankets, right? Those were the guys that, if we did go heavy receiver or we decided to get, rambunctious and take a tight end or whatever somebody may have decided to do, you had that safety blanket there. And now, since that last show, Chris Carson, for example, his ADP was going in the 4th and 5th rounds to now he's often a mid-third. So the mainstream has caught on to kind of the strategy that, we were trying to get people onto early. So we've got to be ready to adapt. And folks, if you're going into a draft this weekend, especially with any other sharp drafters, and you're thinking, I'm going to get Chris Carson in the 4th round, we just can't leave you hanging like that. Sony Michel was a 5th round pick. And I remember on our last show, and we even caught a little bit of flack around this. I think you caught some flack around it, in the big draft you did, the Midwest Classic. I think some folks even on Sirius XM or whatever were saying, you should have taken Derrick Henry. We talked about Derrick Henry on that show and how really he was worth less than Sony Michel. Well, guess what? Those two, the streams have crossed. If you're a Ghostbusters fan, you know what that means. Sony Michel's past Derrick Henry because he should. He's going to be in a better offense. He's going to have more consistent chances to score touchdowns. Derrick Henry is a complete mess when it comes to consistency because he's just not on the field when the team is in close games or when they're losing. And until we see that trend broken, you're basically playing with fire when you play with Derrick Henry. Well, guess what? The public's onto that now. Derrick Henry has fallen into the 4th round. Sony Michel is moving up past him to a higher pick in the 4th round, sometimes going as early as the late, he's even jumped up into like the mid 4th. You usually can get him, a little bit later in the 4th, but Henry is even swinging around in the 5th round sometimes. So a lot moving around. The other thing with running backs is think about it, how much better we probably feel. We helped folks with Austin Eckler in the last podcast. Well, guess what? He shot up a round since we did the last podcast. Now you have to take him at the end of the 5th. But that's not necessarily, the end of the world. We've had a few other names enter the fray, right? We've got Duke Johnson. We talked a little bit last time about Tevin Coleman, but he's sitting there. And then there are a lot of runners that are sitting in that upside tier, Drake, where we've had some change there as well. So if you think about what's going on, we pretty much know Carlos Hyde is going to be gone. We know that now. And so Darwin Thompson, I saw him go in the 7th round, Drake, in the draft I did last night. The 7th round.
Oof, that's aggressive.
That's aggressive, right? But he deserves to be in that 8, 9, 10 round range, depending on roster construction, which we'll walk people through. So those are the big things. Receivers, a little less confident. So we need to talk about how we want to handle that. We can talk about it from some of the different draft spots. Running back, feeling a little more confident in the middle. Meaning, if you want to get a stud wide receiver early, if you're picking down on the end, we'll talk about that a little bit more again. I did an article on this at Football Guys last week. I think it's a very viable strategy to hit the 2 big stud receivers, especially with the way we're feeling about, our confidence in those mid-round runners at this point.
So I got my big draft this weekend where I'm the commissioner of the league and I do all the fun stuff. I decorate and I make sure everybody comes and I order the pizza and the beer and the topless girls to put the names on the board, all that fun stuff that we don't tell our wives about. So I'm going to act like I'm just this total dope and, you're the pro here, you're the expert. And let's say, all right, Dwayne, I'm picking early in my draft. I really want to beat all my buddies here. I got a top 4 pick. Consensus tells me I'm going to take one of these running backs. Am I still doing that? And then what am I doing here in the 2nd and 3rd? So it sounds like to me, you're loving these receivers in the 2nd and 3rd round.
It's not so much just about the 2nd and 3rd round. It really depends on where you're picking. So from the position that you're at in that draft, if you've got a top 4 pick, I still am very much in love with runner.
Really?
But if you want to take a runner with are you in the 4th pick? You said, Drake.
Well, I'm just being a hypothetical guy here. We're saying right now we're talking about I got a top 4 pick, so right. I'm going to take one of those running backs.
Yes, and if someone's nervous about Ezekiel Elliott, that's fine. You can let your foot off the gas. If you would rather take a receiver, you can go ahead. If you're going to take runner, here's what I'm going to tell you. If you don't want Zeke and you still want your 4th pick overall to be runner, don't make it David Johnson. We're at a full on slam on the brakes right now with David Johnson. I didn't like him to begin the offseason. We got a rookie quarterback. We got a bad offensive line. We got a team that wants to spread the field, yet they have no receivers to spread the field with. It's like, I like Cliff Kingsbury. I really want to see what he can do with the air raid long term, but let's just be logical here, folks. It's very likely that this is going to be a very bad team. Vegas still has them at 6 wins. If you can't win games, you can't play ahead, guess what? You can't score rushing touchdowns. And a PPR, half PPR, David Johnson, I still believe is going to hold value because I don't think they're showing everything they're going to do with him yet in the preseason as far as being a receiver. But I will be honest with you. I like Nick Chubb over David Johnson. I like James Conner over David Johnson. Go watch James Conner's offensive line block and then go watch the Cardinals line block. You don't need to watch anything else. Mm-hmm. And oh, by the way, the Steelers are going to win more games than the Cardinals. They're going to play ahead more. They've got a seasoned quarterback. James Conner could lead the league in rushing. I'm just going to say it right now. When you go watch his offensive line, and I tweeted about this the other day because last week when we were on the pod, Drake, remember me getting all excited about the Steelers' offensive line and saying, Drake, you got to go watch them. It happened again. I mean, they literally just wall off a whole side of the field. The guy's not leaving the field. He's played 95% of the snaps with the first team in the preseason. Yes, Jalen Samuels is probably they have some packages for Jalen Samuels. I'm certain they're not showing to folks, but I don't see any scenario where James Conner is going to have his value, largely curtailed by Jalen Samuels. I think Jalen Samuels can have a role in this offense, helping replace some of the stuff that AB is leaving behind without having to take from James Conner. And I think that's what you'll see. You're going to see a little bit of both of them on the field together, that sort of thing. But James Conner looks great, and this offensive line looks great.
How early would you take James Conner in a draft? PPR.
I'm willing to take him from pick 6 anywhere on. I've got him ahead of Mixon. I've got him ahead of Gurley. I like all those guys, so people can still take their preference. But I've just seen enough. I've just seen enough to know that when we get to the end of the year, like if you were to tell me right now, hey, Dwayne, look at that tier just below Kamara, Barkley, McCaffrey, and Elliott, and pick me 2 out of that whole tier that if you just had to pick 2 that you think could end up being close to those guys. James Conner would be one of them. The other one would be Nick Chubb. Those are the two. Those are the two. And I love Dalvin Cook too, but I'd give him just a slight discount. I'm not a big injury guy, but I am willing to say, okay, great. He has been hurt more than the other guys, so fine. You want to downgrade him. It's like a tiebreaker, right? So I would put him a little bit lower. But Nick Chubb and James Conner, I'm fine. Now, I don't think you have to force it over a Devontae Adams or DeAndre Hopkins. That's not what I'm saying. If you're in a non-PPR league, then I think you might do that, right? If you're in a half PPR league, you're probably on the fence. You're in a full PPR. I still like those receivers just because, you're pretty much going to be locked in for 150 to 200 targets, right, with those receivers, and you can feel good about it. But if you want to go runner, it's James Conner. It's definitely not David Johnson. In fact, I would take, at this point, I'm taking David Johnson after all the guys I just named.
Let me ask you this. I'm looking at that tier of running backs. So give me David Johnson, Nick Chubb, Joe Mixon, okay? And I'll even put Dalvin Cook in there. All of these guys have offensive lines that worry me. They're either starting new guys who are rookies or people have moved on. There's injuries in the preseason. It really worries me. We saw Dalvin Cook's line last year was horrible, besides the fact that he got hurt. Joe Mixon's line is a disaster. It's a dumpster fire right now. He was good last year, again, because he's Joe Mixon and he's very talented, but there's not a lot of talent in front of him. Even the Browns, that's their Achilles heel right now. If they have any weakness on that roster, that offensive line is not great. And David Johnson, my God, that's a pack of Girl Scouts out in front of him. So if you got to make a tiebreaker, I love what you're talking about with the offensive line, and James Conner to me is so safe. And in the first few rounds, don't you want to be safe and make sure you're just going to tuck in 15 points a week to your lineup? Between those guys, though, that I just mentioned with those tough offensive lines, how would you rank them between Chubb, Mixon, Cook?
I'm going Chubb first, then I'm going Cook, then I'm going Mixon. So here's what I will say for Dalvin Cook. Gary Kubiak is now the assistant head coach. So this scheme is all about him.
Yep.
This type of scheme can play huge favors to offensive lines because of the way that they set up their plays to look almost exactly the same, run or pass. It keeps the defensive linemen so on their heels, and they have to be constantly concerned about, is this a run or is this a pass? And as long as they're not in big trailing situations, which this team has a good defense, they've got a defensive minded coach, and we can have other issues with that fantasy wise, but what you're not going to have is whenever it comes to running backs, in this scheme, it typically plays out very well for them. And I think the team is set up to be very complementary, right, in that particular nature. So the other thing with the Vikings is they did add a new center, right, in the draft. I think that was a hand pick from Kubiak. Then they go out and they grab Alexander Madison because they want to make sure they can run the ball. So I think they're going to be able to run the ball very well. Unfortunately, Dalvin Cook popped that monster run last week. So a lot of people that had doubts about Dalvin Cook, just now all of a sudden, I think the injuries, they're kind of weighing it in their mind and like, I don't care about injuries. So they're kind of where, we've been advising for a while in, that first part of the second round to mid part of the second round. If you get your hands on Dalvin Cook, if you need a runner, he's a great guy to have. But I would put then Joe Mixon next. But here's what I want to say about Joe Mixon. What's funny is think about how much he's fallen, Drake, in drafts. Why? Because people are worried about the offensive line, and they're smart about that. Oh, what else are they worried about? Well, who's going to be their receivers? AJ Green is hurt. Who's going to do this? Who's going to do that? How's that any different than the Cardinals?
How is it any different than last year? It's the exact same situation that Mixon had.
Right, but my point is, how's that any different than the Cardinals? Yet David Johnson's ADP is not falling. People have bought so much into this Cliff Kingsbury thing, and I get it. He's going to run 1,100 plays. Is he really? Is he really going to get 1,100 attempts? Is he? Maybe we've seen other coaches, try this, and some of them have been successful. But an extra 50 plays versus maybe an extra 75, right? Versus what you're going to get on a typical offense. That's what you're getting, and let's say 40% of those are runs because the Cardinals are going to be trailing and they're going to have to pass most of the time. And then let's say of that 40%, 60% of those go to David Johnson. It's just, it's not enough in attempts to really make David Johnson that much more valuable because he's going to struggle to score touchdowns because they're going to be behind. They're going to be trying to throw the ball. They're not going to want to keep the clock running. So that's my order. I would go Chubb, then I'm going Cook, then I'm going Mixon.
Let's say we're going to start mixing in wide receivers here. So DeAndre Hopkins, typically the first receiver off the board, followed by take your pick, whoever you like most, Devontae Adams, Julio Jones. You've got a great tier of guys, Odell, Juju, Michael Thomas, Tyreek Hill. Where do you fall with these receivers? At what point in the first round do you say, I'm skipping over the runner, give me one of these high-end receivers? And is there a point in the first round where you stop taking receiver? Like, is there a fall off in that tier where you say, I'll wait till the second round. Whatever guy falls to me from that group, I'm fine within the second.
Yeah. So, this versus just being a first-round question, this starts to become a roster construction question, right? How you may be thinking about building your roster. But in the simplest terms, Hopkins, Adams, Julio, and Odell Beckham Jr. and Tyreek Hill. Mm-hmm. If I can get two of any of that combination, that would be the combinations that would make me willing to go wide receiver. Now I like Michael Thomas, and I love Juju Smith-Schuster. Been talking him up since February. But what Mike Thomas and Juju don't have, they have that huge upside in volume, but they just don't have the upside as far as the big play ability. Like DeAndre Hopkins, yeah, he's still more in the vein of a Michael Thomas or Tyreek Hill. Juju Smith-Schuster, but they use him in a wider variety of ways. He gets used more, in the red zone. If you think about, Odell Beckham Jr. and Tyreek Hill, those guys can score on any play from anywhere. And they could end up being in line for similar, Tyreek Hill's not going to see as many targets as those guys, but it's just such a differentiated offense, right? And the opportunity for huge upside with the touchdowns is there. So any out of those five, any two that I can pair, okay. I think the optional guys that if you want to pair down there towards the turn, Drake, is if you want to pair Michael Thomas or Juju Smith-Schuster, those would be the next two guys that I would consider. I'm not going to do it with Mike Evans or anyone else. I'm going to let those guys go by for runners. I think it's really up to, the drafter to determine whether they want to take Michael Thomas, Juju Smith-Schuster, if those are the options left, or if you want to go back to runner. Because many times Nick Chubb or James Conner, they'll come back around that corner. to you. So it doesn't happen every draft. It's happening less than what it used to. But those guys are going to be options, and Dalvin Cook can also be an option. So if that's the case, and I'm looking at Dalvin, Cook, or I'm looking at Nick Chubb versus Mike Thomas or Juju Smith-Schuster, in that case, I'm starting to lean back runner if I'm in a non-PPR. If it's a half-point PPR, it's almost a tie. If it's a full-point PPR, I'm still probably going with the receivers.
How high are you on Tyreek Hill this year? Last year, the guy was over 1,400 yards, 12 touchdowns through the air, ran for one. He was a monster. But do you just get the feeling all the offseason stuff, people got a little tape on him now? Do you think we're up for a letdown with Tyreek Hill, or is he going to still be a guy who could be the number one receiver in fantasy like a year ago?
Well, I think my answer, is in that I included him in that top five. I think he's obviously a guy. He could finish number one again easily. Here's the thing with Hill. I don't expect him to get 26, 27% of the Chiefs' targets because they're not built that way. But neither is Travis Kelce. He'll see 24%. Neither will, Sammy Watkins. He'll be 17, 18, 19%. Mecole Hardman will sneak out there some. Damian Williams will get, some of his work. But they're hyper efficient. But there's still always a ceiling, Drake, that it could happen. What if all of a sudden Tyreek Hill did see 26, 27% of the targets? What would happen in that case? It could be the leading scorer in all of fantasy football. Now, what are the odds of that happening? They're not high, but it's a nice what if kind of scenario that's just built into his upside. It's naturally there. We can't for sure say that won't happen. Now, we're not counting on it. You don't even need that to draft him at that turn, but there is an upside that could be so crazy that it's almost unimaginable because of the way that offense works, and you have that elite quarterback. And as far as teams being able to game plan for him, it's just hard because they have so many good weapons and they have such a good play caller in Andy Reid. They have two elite and another top-end weapon on the field at all times and one of the best schemers in the game. And they have arguably the best quarterback. So I don't see any defense being able to just stop them consistently. Might here or there we have a week where there's a blip. Yeah, but it's going to be mostly due to something where it's a self-destruction kind of thing on their own part. Now, we know the Patriots are the type of team that can do this because Belichick, he knows how to do those sorts of things. But the other coaches in the league, they don't play on the same tier as Bill Belichick. They can't, Tyreek Hill is not someone that I expect to be stopped.
Let's stick with that same team and move it over to running back now. Did you see my boy Damian Williams take that little swing pass out of the backfield and go 62 yards? Oh, what a thing of beauty. Have you changed your tune at all on Damian Williams? Is he still a third-round pick for you? Or would you say somewhere in the second, would you go, you know what, the guy is in such an electric offense, let me take him in the second round. Go get your guy if he's your guy. Or are you still saying, I got to hold off and wait till 3?
Well, if he's at the very end of 2, I'm going to consider him, but I'm still scared. Darwin Thompson looks really good. I love the offense. I love Andy Reid. I've been a fan of this offense forever, what he's done with his runners. And I do think that Damian Williams obviously can be, good in the offense. I'm still just concerned about, is it going to truly be Damian Williams's, role? I mean, we've been on a roller coaster with that story since preseason started, right? It was, Damian Williams is the guy. No, he's not the guy. Yes, Damian Williams is the guy. No, he's not the guy. Now, some of that is reporters have to do their job, and so we have to read between the lines on, and try to understand context. What was the actual question asked versus what was, how was the quote used? All of those sorts of things, which can be tough. But for me, I still have to get, past like Mike Evans, for me to consider, Damian Williams, just because Mike Evans is a guy that, I think is, a really good receiver. I think Damian Williams is an okay player that's in a really good scheme. So I'm still going to lean towards the guy that I know is proven. Now, once I get past that, yeah, I'm willing to take him, over some of the other receivers down there.
And I think Amari Cooper. Are you taking him over them?
No, I'm not taking one of them because they don't go to they have injury concerns right now. So I'm out on those guys until, we'll come back to that topic here in a minute, towards the end of the late late third round, early fourth round. T.Y. Hilton is going to be falling. So you've got several different things going on there that I do believe overall pushes Damian Williams up the board some, but I'm just not willing to, take him, in the mid-second at this point.
So we've talked about these receivers who are kind of scaring us because we don't know what's going on with Keenan Allen and his ankle. Amari Cooper's got the plantar fascia thing going on. And, Amari Cooper, I want to ask you this question. I saw this online where a guy pointed out Amari Cooper, he had a 25% target share with Dallas last year, but he really only had 2 big games. I think after that, he might have had like 9 games where he didn't even have over 80 yards. Does Amari Cooper really hold up as a high-end wide receiver 2? Or in some cases where you're drafting him, he would be your wide receiver 1 if you took, a couple running backs in front of him. What are your thoughts on the Cowboys wideout? Because you're in Big D. You're a big Dallas fan.
I'm fine with Amari Cooper. I'm just concerned. The injury does concern me some, because that's knowing what receivers do, especially thinking about his game. Amari Cooper creates amazing separation in his routes. If people haven't watched, they should just go watch. I remember whenever Dallas was going to make the trade for him, or right after there was consideration around the trade. They didn't know what, round pick they were going to give up. I did a piece actually for Matt Waldman over at the RSP where I went back and charted every play for Amari Cooper over the previous 2.5 seasons. And what I was just blown away with is that no one could cover him. He can attack every area of the field. He can attack underneath. He can attack the intermediate, and he can win deep balls. He can win deep balls with speed. He can win the deep ball, with a 50-50 jump ball. Now, he's not as elite as an Odell Beckham Jr. in that regard to his game, but his intermediate and short prowess is very similar to what you would see from a Julio Jones. He's actually a better route runner than Julio Jones at creating separation. He's not quite as good with the ball in his hands, although he's still elite. So when you have a player that can do all of those things, you hear me talk about what is their on-field application. Amari Cooper can do it all. He can work deep. He can work intermediate. He can work short. He can win with physicality. He can win with quickness to create separation, and he can win with speed. So he's a guy that you can he's only limited by your imagination in the offense. And so
that sounds like such a commercial. He's only limited by your imagination.
Well, it's true.
They showed Jerry Jones fist pumping in the owner's booth.
Yeah, when you that's a great commercial. But when you have a player like that, it's just true. There are many players that are really good at one or two things, and they need to land with the exact right coach, the other right complementary players. Amari Cooper's not one of those. He can do it all. He has lapses in concentration at times, which has drops have popped up on him, at times. He didn't really have that struggle last year in Dallas. What happened to Amari Cooper? If you're going to have a concern about him, here's what happened to him, Drake. In the second half, the Cowboys just shut their offense down. They would be winning games, and they would go into a conservative mode. So what we hope to see, and what Kellen Moore has said he's going to the team, is he's going to be more aggressive in the second half. And as long as that happens, Amari Cooper has wide receiver 1 upside. Now, again, a little bit worried about the injury, but here's, for me, I'm still willing to take Amari, at the end of the third. We've got to keep a very close eye on this injury stuff, but I'm not going to take him at the earlier in the draft season. I was aggressive enough on him that I was willing to take him, down towards the beginning of the third and even in the middle of the third. I liked him, and I still do. Liked him over T.Y. Hilton. Liked him over even Adam Thielen. That now is probably flip-flopped. I would go back Thielen now, just knowing that I don't have to worry about the injury. But I liked him over Antonio Brown. I'm still going to hold true to that. I liked him over Stephon Diggs. I'm still going to hold true to that. As long as he's healthy, I think he's going to outperform those particular players. I think Adam Thielen is close enough where just being a little worried about the injury, that I would lean slightly back to Thielen. And Diggs and those other guys are close to as well now. But I still like Cooper.
I love talking about these tiers of receivers because there's so many interesting guys. Where are you on where are you on Antonio Brown? I'm kind of out on him. I'm just taking him off my board. There's so much craziness there. I just don't see him returning any kind of value from where you're going to have to draft him. Hey, maybe he catches, 90 balls in that offense, and they're all 4 yards from the line of scrimmage because Derek Carr doesn't throw it on the field. But I'm out with all the nonsense. The guys had like 8 minutes of practice all summer with Derek Carr, if that. What do you think about AB?
I was definitely more against him a week ago. And so here's what's happening. This isn't just about a knee jerk. This is just that we've got other doubts creeping in, right, around players. So T.Y. Hilton has dropped out of my wide receiver 2 tier. He's down in, one of my bottom wide receiver 3 tiers. I've got him down all the way down by Cooper Kupp, Curtis Samuel, Calvin Ridley, Kenny Golladay. That's the tier that T.Y. Hilton's in. And even there, I'm not excited about him.
No.
So when those sorts of things start happening, and if you do have a concern about Keenan Allen, or maybe you're the type of drafter that, in the 3rd round, I don't want to take a receiver with any injury risk, so Amari Cooper's out. I can understand that. Then Antonio Brown starts to creep back into the conversation because he still needs to be ahead of Tyler Lockett. He should still be ahead of Robert Woods. He's still ahead of Tyler Boyd. You could make an argument that you want to go Chris Godwin over him. You just want to get fancy with it. But I think I think even that in itself, as much as I love Chris Godwin, we're starting to get to the point where I don't think Antonio Brown is going to be a 0. I just thought originally in the draft season he was overpriced for what I expected to go on in this offense. And then he wasn't working with his quarterback. He wasn't in camp. And those things are still going to hurt him. And he's, yes, a head case. So that's always, some additional risk. But if you think injury risk is a bigger concern than Antonio Brown just being a head case, which could happen, he's going to learn with Derek Carr. Derek Carr doesn't know how to extend plays and create that extra little bit of time to let him do his thing and then get the ball downfield to him. Carr can get it to him deep on design plays where it's the first or second read. But a lot of those plays he used to get from Ben, I won't be surprised if there's an emotional meltdown, but I can't take him off the board, Drake, just because of those other players that we're talking about. He belongs right in that range we talked about. I'm still taking him ahead of Lockett, Woods, Boyd, and those guys. Why? Because I still think his floor is just as good as theirs, and I think he still has the potential to offer more upside than those guys. If I think about Robert Woods, I love him, but he's locked in a 3-way competition with other receivers. Tyler Lockett, I love him, but at 20 to 22% targets, which is about what he's going to get in an offense that doesn't pass a lot, it doesn't leave me a lot of margins for volume upside that I can still get with Brown. Now I love Tyler Lockett this year, so I don't want the listeners to get me wrong, but it would just be that's the range where it would get tough for me to pass Antonio Brown. I don't feel like he's I'm never going to draft him type of thing. I think he's just one of those guys that I don't get to take him most often, Drake, just because he goes before I pick. He's typically, I've seen him still go in the 2nd round. In a draft I did last night, he went in the 2nd. So I didn't have to worry about it. But there are drafts where folks are onto it. And if he slides down to the end of the 3rd, he's into the early 4th. He's not a guy that is a complete avoid for me at this point. Like T.Y. Hilton's much more on that list than Antonio Brown is.
Let's just get to that because every show in America started their broadcast this week talking about the Colts, and Dwain and I purposely said we're not going to talk about the Colts because it's been beaten to death. You guys have heard the story. I'm done. I'm out on the Colts. Forget Marlon Mack. I've talked to multiple guys go, they're going to run the ball more. No, there's stats that show Marlon Mack is a worse fantasy asset when Andrew Luck, is not on the field because he doesn't catch any passes. He is great when the Colts have the lead. If you look at his target share also on the team, it's non-existent. And you've got a guy on the other side of Naheem Hines who, what did he have, 80 balls last year that he caught? I don't think that's going to totally go away. I don't care what some Roto World blurb says. I'm out on him. T.Y. Hilton, forget about it. I don't care if he was a top 30 wide receiver with Brissett. He's going to be so boom or bust week to week. He's basically, to me, Deshaun Jackson now. The tight ends, you can look back at the old stats, and Jack Doyle obviously had much more chemistry with Brissett, and he just saw the field more, got more targets. Who knows? I did a draft tonight with a bunch of guys who were on Sirius, and I took Eric Ebron real late in the draft just on the hope he's going to catch touchdowns. But that's my thoughts on the Colts. I'm out. I'm going to act like they almost don't exist this year in fantasy. Dwain, you're much smarter than I am. What are your thoughts on the boys from Indy?
Yeah, let's hit the receivers first. I think you're dead on. I'm out on Hilton. I'm out on Eric Ebron. And when I say I'm out, it's because of what they're still going to cost. Now, T.Y. Hilton, even in a half-point PPR situation, he's fallen from right around the end of a third pick, and he had slowly been trending down as people started to realize, wow, there's more weapons in this offense now. He may not see his typical 25% target share. He was probably going to be more around 22, 23. He had began as a early round 3 pick. And that had dropped down to late third round. And then once this news broke, the market, honestly, and that's what we're dealing with, right, is markets. The market reacted correctly. He dropped all the way down to being an end of the 4th round pick. I'm not taking T.Y. Hilton until the 6th round.
Yeah.
He could go through the whole.
Hell with that.
Yeah. Now, it was at the end of the 4th that it's dropped to, but I'm out. There's too many other guys that I still like in that range that I think still provide me with more potential upside than what I'm going to get out of T.Y. Hilton with Jacoby Brissett as his quarterback. Brissett is a functional quarterback, but he has, if you ever listen to Matt Waldman, he talks about the difference between general accuracy and pinpoint accuracy. General accuracy is when you're charting your plays, the ball was in the vicinity of the receiver and he could catch it. Right? He didn't have to reach way behind him or way in front of him or make a miraculous catch all the time. It was somewhere where the receiver could move his hands around and catch it, still be okay. Might have to dive down a little bit to catch it. But what it is not is a guy that can lead his receiver on the run consistently, can pinpoint is positioning the ball, right at the right level where the receiver just basically is plucking the ball and they're moving, right? They turn to a running back immediately once the ball's in their hand. And if you think about T.Y. Hilton, that is how he wins. He wins by creating separation with his speed, and the quarterback has to put the ball right on him, and then that allows him to run after the catch. That's gone. That's going to be very, very inconsistent now with Jacoby Brissett. The deep ball, Jacoby Brissett's deep ball is not terrible, but it's not as consistent either. So the long speed that T.Y. Hilton is going to be a bit negated. Now factor in that what we just heard from Frank Reich today was basically Jacoby Brissett. He said, don't be a hero. I think of Bill Parcells. What he's saying is, you're going to be our bus driver, buddy. You're going to drive the bus. Mm-hmm. We're going to ask you to drop back and basically not beat us. And they have some confidence, in Brissett, and they should, because this is still a very diverse offense. But I'm with you. I'm out on the pass catching options at this point, unless they fall really far. And even then, it's just probably not going to be part of my plan. Now, where I do disagree is with Marlon Mack. And here's why. Because I do believe to allow Jacoby Brissett to be a bus driver, we're going to see a bit of a shift in the mentality from Frank Reich. Last year, Marlon Mack was just like Derrick Henry. If the Colts weren't leading, right, he was nothing. Mm-hmm. And you're right. He was absolutely nothing. And we've talked about that on our show multiple times and getting people to fade Marlon Mack. Here's the good news on Marlon Mack. He's fallen all the way to the end of the the end of the 4th round. So his value, I think that's an overreaction on Marlon Mack because the Colts have a really good offensive line. Here's the other thing. In the week before, when all the starters still played, before Andrew Luck, decided he was going to, retire, and Adam Schefter reported it during the game and everything. The week before that, a very, very interesting thing occurred with Marlon Mack. There was a 1st and 20, and then there was a 3rd and really long. Last year, in those situations, that was always Nyheim Hines. In that game, it was not. Nyheim Hines got 2 of those looks with the starters. Marlon Mack got the other 2 looks. And this goes with what we've been hearing from camp. We've been hearing the reporters say they expect Marlon Mack to have more of a role in the passing game. We've also heard some things from Frank Reich, not directly saying that. So when I piece all those things together, I actually think Marlon Mack's value, I don't think he'll score as many touchdowns, Drake. I don't think.
Oh, absolutely not.
But I do think he actually may score just as many points as he would have without Andrew Luck, and it may even be a little more consistent because I do think they're going to try to stick with the run longer. And I do not think that Nyheim Hines is going to be the main guy to benefit. I'm hearing that a lot on Twitter as well. But if you look down the stretch last year, they started to eliminate some of Nyheim Hines' role. Now, some of that was due to game scripts. When you look at percentage of plays, though, even his percentage of routes ran per dropback did start to tell off a bit. He still definitely held a role, but some of that they started giving to Marlon Mack. And so I think when I had to go back and look at that again today, to be ready for this show. But as I start to piece together all those things, I actually think that, Marlon Mack will probably be okay. And at his discount, he's the one that I'm still going to buy.
All right, let me play a game with you here. Marlon Mack or these guys. So I'm going to name a guy. You tell me if you'll take Mack or this other player. Who are you going to draft? Okay. Marlon Mack or Austin Eckler?
Yeah, I'm still going to take Marlon Mack.
All right. Marlon Mack, Kenyon Drake.
Marlon Mack.
David Montgomery.
Marlon Mack.
Melvin Gordon.
I'm man, that's getting into the range where you won't see Gordon get there. I haven't drafted him yet because he'll usually go on the third. But man, if he were to fall into like the fifth round and I was facing him or Mack, depending on, again, these games, Drake, I always have to use the depends. It really depends on your roster construction,
sure.
And what you've done to this point and what you're thinking multiple moves ahead of your opponents. How are you going to recover? That's really close. If I felt like, for example, let's say I'd started with 3 receivers and then come back, with say a Sony Michel, and now I'm in the 5th round, I'm probably just going to go ahead and take Marlon Mack, but if I had started with, 2 receivers and 1 runner, and I'm really thinking about my flex spot, and I know I'm still going to have flexibility for the remainder of the draft to cover for Melvin Gordon's pick with a receiver or a runner, then I'm going to go Melvin Gordon at that spot and then I'm just going to shove him on my bench and I'm going to find a different player to play for him in the next few rounds as a flex.
This is the Fantasy Football Hustle. We are proud members of the FulltimeFantasy.com podcast network. So check out all the fun stuff going on over there at FulltimeFantasy.com. I am Brian Drake of FightingChanceFantasy.com. You can follow me on Twitter at DrakeFantasy. Dwain McFarland is the smart guy over here. You can follow him at Dwain McFarland. Spell it DWAIN. And if you're listening to this show, there's a damn good chance you're following him on Twitter because, Dwain, your Twitter followers has spiked like Sony Michel's ADP over the past week and a half.
Yeah, man, it's crazy, to be honest. Like, I'm thankful. I think it's awesome. I just think it's cool that so many people are enjoying the content because honestly, I mean, me, I'm just kind of nerding out and having fun. I love digging into this stuff and, I love football. And so to be able to interact with the community and folks are finding it helpful, it gets me super excited, gets me, pumped up to get up and watch more film and, put myself through some misery of preseason film. But it's all worth it because folks are getting stuff out of it. So I'm having a blast.
So I see some of your interactions on Twitter. You're talking about Duke Johnson with a number of people. So Duke Johnson, obviously now, as far as we know, is the lead guy for the Houston Texans. All right. Are they going to bring somebody in? Maybe. Otherwise, you're looking at a bunch of, undrafted free agents and whatever. I want to know, because you're a guy who does his own projections, where do you put Duke Johnson in terms of rushing attempts for the year and what's, what kind of percentage of targets do you have going his way? And now where does he fall in the grand scheme of running back? Because this is a guy now who went from, maybe he's on your bench and you can use him in a pinch to possible, strong flex player, upside RB2. What say you?
He can be an RB2. He's an easy RB3. But him moving into this tier, Drake, is an example of, of the zoom out we talked about earlier. So let's say that you started on the end with Odell Beckham Jr. and Tyreek Hill, which I love to do. Let's say you started with that from pick 10.
That's spicy. I like that.
Let's say you come back in round 3 and you tell me, Drake, do you want to go receiver here or do you want to go ahead and grab, our guy, Chris Carson? You can pick and we'll take it from here.
You're going to take Chris Carson there.
Okay, so let's say we take Chris Carson, and now we've stabilized, that's the stabilizing force for our runners. Coming back around the corner in the 4th round, though, now, because of what's happening with this tier that is developed in the middle of the draft, Marlon Mack is now getting pushed down into it, right? And we've got Austin Eckler in it. Now we get Duke Johnson in it. People are like, well, Lamar Miller was in it, but Lamar Miller did not have Duke Johnson's receiving upside. That's the difference.
Yeah.
I'm giving Duke Johnson the same percentage of carries to answer your question. I've got him slotted for 45% of the team attempts. And they haven't even signed anybody yet. I'm just assuming they're going to get somebody to help complement him that'll get 30% or so. Then Deshaun Watson will pick up 10, 15%. You may have another back pick up 5%, of the work. Maybe it's a Crockett, somebody like that. Or maybe that's who they roll with as their 2. And if they don't sign anybody, I'm going to bump Duke Johnson up to, 50, 55% of the carries. But even at just 45%, Drake, of the carries, and then I already had him at 8 to 10%, of the targets. So if I take those targets that I was giving to Lamar Miller, and now I just give most of them over to Duke Johnson, which is what I did. I gave him 5%. I think I had Miller at 7. I've deleted it, so it's not in my sheet. But I've got Duke Johnson at 12% of the targets. So that's 212 carries, 845 yards, 6 rushing touchdowns. Nothing to write home about, but it's okay. But now 64 targets for 50 catches, for 400 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. So you're getting a 1,200 all-purpose guy. Now, this is his median to kind of almost – I'm probably even being like median kind of flourish with him. He could easily, Drake, go to 15% of the targets. He could easily get to 55% of the carries unless they bring in another runner. Now, so what I gave you before would have been in a PPR around 225 points. But if he just got to 55% of the team carries and 15% of the targets, he jumps to 265. That's a third-round pick. He has the upside to be a third-round pick. And the difference, again, between him and Lamar Miller is his upside as a receiver, and currently they don't have another runner on the team. So I'm leaving him at the 45%, assuming they're going to do something. Now, if they bring in someone like a LaShawn McCoy, Drake, if a trade like that happened, then I think you got to dump Duke down a little bit more. Then I think he almost turns more back into what we had him before. And LaShawn McCoy, really, you have to give him what Lamar Miller was getting and maybe even a little bit more. But if it's a guy like, say a Kenneth Dixon, someone along those lines, and I like that player, I think you can pretty much just stick with what I've got right here for Duke Johnson. So 212 carries, 850 yards, 6 rushing touchdowns, 50 catches, 400 yards, 2 touchdowns receiving. Not a huge season, but man, talk about a guy you can plug in at RB2 and be a stabilizing factor. It's nice because now he fits into that tier, and all of a sudden you grab him. Let's say, so we got Carson. Now come in the 4th round. We don't have to take another runner right away. Let's say we decided we want Chris Godwin, Drake.
You're going to get him in the 4th, 5th round?
4th round, the very beginning of the 4th. Remember, we're just talking about it. You took Odell Beckham Jr.
I hope.
You took Odell Beckham Jr. So, what's Godwin's ADP? Right now in a normal draft, Godwin is going at the very end of the 3rd and the beginning of the 4th. Yeah, I'm looking at it.
All right. Hey, I hope he's there.
Chris Godwin is round 4, pick 7.
All
That's
right,
his ADP right now.
Let's pray he's there.
You're slanted because he just went super early in the one draft, the big draft that you were in. But I'm drafting, quite often. I've seen him go in the 3rd round twice, but that's in 40 drafts. I've done over 40 drafts, so he does sneak into the 3rd sometimes. But he's a guy that's typically there, coming back around the turn in the 4th. So now you've started off with Odell Beckham Jr., Tyreek Hill, Chris Carson, Chris Godwin.
Oh, my God.
Coming back in the 5th. Before, it was a little tight. You may have had to push something or even gone with a Miles Sanders as your upside pick. Now, Duke Johnson's added to the mix. Marlon Mack is falling down the boards. Austin Eckler has moved up, but he's still sitting right around that range. Tevin Coleman. Where's Tevin Coleman going right now, Drake? Tevin Coleman's round 5, pick 3, so he's probably, gone, but, he could slide to you in that range. But Austin Eckler and Duke Johnson, man, those guys are right in your crosshairs. Before, it was like, okay, we've got Austin Eckler, and then if not, we got to think Miles Sanders. So what's happening with these runners makes me more willing down on the other end to double up on receiver, come back with a runner, then get another receiver, and then come back again and hit the runners. Now, once you've done that, now you've got Chris Carson and Duke Johnson. We're heading into the 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th rounds. In those rounds, somewhere in rounds 8, 9, 10, and 11, you're going to grab 2 of these guys: Breida, Darwin Thompson, Tony Pollard, Justice Hill, and Alexander Madison.
Preach.
You're going to get 2 of those. So now I've got my 2 guys that I'm depending on, but I have built in upside now. I want one of these other 2 guys to eventually take Duke Johnson's place, or if I'm in a flex league, to potentially turn into my league-winning flex.
I love when you say build in upside, because when you're drafting at the end of a round, like, for instance, you're drafting 10, 11, 12 in a 12-team league, you can just sit there and take what falls to you, and you're getting the end of the running backs. You're getting kind of, all right, give me like the third, fourth best wide receiver. You could go Travis Kelce, but at some point you need to try to build in an advantage to your team. Our friend Sigmund Bloom says it on his podcast a lot, and it pertains to tight ends and quarterbacks, and we'll shift to that in a second. You can go cheap, but don't go cheap on both. So, if you get that high-end tight end, then maybe you can wait on the quarterback. If you get a nice quarterback, then maybe you can wait on the tight end. Let me now get, Dwayne, your draft plan for tight end. So we've got the big 3 with, Kittle, Ertz, and of course Travis Kelce. Are you taking any of those guys? Are they more appealing at the end of the second round, beginning of the third round? Are you saying, I kind of like Kittle here? Or are you more in line with what you hear from so many fantasy guys out there of that big sweet spot: Ingram, Howard, Henry, Jared Cook?
Yeah, I think it is a good question. In the draft plan, we talked about this. I don't take quarterbacks or tight ends. I actually disagree with Sig. I let it all hang out. I don't care about either one. I'm waiting. This is the year you can do it. It changes every year. It's about roster construction, right? If you want to maximize your advantages, you can wait. Now, here's what I'm going to say. With the unknowns that some folks may feel you have with Cooper, you have with Keenan Allen, let's say you're worried about Antonio Brown being a head case. Let's say, you're looking at the runners at the end of round 3. It does get to a spot there, Drake, where I could see that if for some reason Ertz or say, Kelsey's obviously gone. Kelsey's going in the first round, which is I'm out. I don't think it's a good strategy. We talked about it on the last show. People can go back and listen. I'm not doing it. It's not worth it. Now, if for some reason Kittle or Ertz fall to you at the end of the third, I would be willing to pull the trigger at times on one of those guys. I haven't done it yet. I've taken Ertz once and he fell to me in the 4th. Now I'm in a lot of tight end premium type leagues. And in those leagues, obviously that changes everything, but we're talking normal PPR, half point PPR, and even non PPR. I do not think that Travis Kelce provides as big of an advantage as we necessarily think. And, here's part of the reason why is I love him as a tight end, but when we love Gronk, and we were so excited about Gronk, and when we used to be willing to take him in the first round, it's because that he was potentially the Patriots' whole offense. Mm-hmm. Kelce just isn't, and he doesn't have the upside efficiency to hit on 15, 16, 17 yards of play like a Tyreek Hill could, on less work. Now, I like Kelce, and I think he's great, but if I've got to pass Devontae Adams or I've got to pass James Conner or Nick Chubb when I think about position scarcity, I don't want to do it. So what I'm coming back to, here's the guy that if he falls, if OJ Howard falls into the 6th round, I've gotten to where, and even maybe in the 5th round, depending on what's going on, he's a guy where I'm willing to pull the trigger sometimes. And, you've even seen me do it in some of these, mid-stake type drafts that we've gone back and recapped. I will occasionally do that. And I think what we're seeing in the preseason, man, Drake, he's never leaving the field. Yeah. I mean, the guy's never played even 70% of the snaps on a game-to-game basis. And so it's just enough that now he's going to be out there, way more often, when they're in 21 personnel or whenever they, are out there on first downs. And sometimes that used to be Brait. He's not leaving the field. Brait is supplementing him. Brait is not taking his place. And so just by the nature of how good he is getting to be on the field all the time and how much this team will pass the ball, man, with his efficiency and what he's capable of, man, would it surprise me if he ended up being in the top, right there on the cusp of scoring just as much as those other 3 guys? I think there's a path for him to do that. Of course, he's got other weapons on the team, but, so does Kelsey. Ertz has more mouths around him that have to be fed now. George Kittle, he's the guy that I think now re-looking back at the situation because Pettis hasn't taken a hold of it. The other rookies they're kind of doing their thing. I think it's very clear to me now at this point that Kittle is the 1A, for the 49ers. So he's a guy that if he falls to you at the end of the third, you could potentially be getting Travis Kelce, but in the third. So I could see that argument. But otherwise, OJ Howard, I'm willing to take if he's falling. After that, we've already talked about Vance McDonald, in the 7th, 8th round. I feel great about that. There was the quote last week, Drake, from, one of Pittsburgh reporters, saying that, he asked Randy Fichtner, the offensive coordinator, what it looked like to me is his question was, will Vance McDonald play all the snaps? Because the response that he got back was no, he never will. So if it was just, is Vance McDonald going to play more snaps? I think we see a different kind of response. So this is one of those deals where, and I could be wrong, but I'm just reading in between the lines because when I watch preseason, Drake, Vance McDonald doesn't leave the field. Xavier Grimble is only supplementing him. He comes in 12, and then when the starters leave and the second group comes in, they're out there. I think really what was meant is, Vance McDonald's not going to play every snap because no tight end does. You got to give everybody a little bit of a breather. So McDonald is still squarely in my crosshairs in the 7th, 8th. Now, if I miss there, Drake, my plan is you got to fade Mark Andrews now. There's still a path to taking him that could provide value, but don't expect to start him week 1. You could be riding a major roller coaster. He's only playing a third of the snaps. He's probably only going to play about half of the Ravens' passing plays, which may be the lowest passing total in the league. I know, big article, aha today. Oh, my God, the Ravens may throw the ball 30 times a game. Well, no shit. That's what we knew they were going to do. And it will still be the lowest in the league. It's so funny to see so many people react to that. I've got them projected at 488 passing attempts. 30 attempts a game would be 480. People act like that's a lot. 480 pass attempts is nothing. That'll be the lowest in the league if they do that, besides maybe Seattle. So taking that information, understanding how little they're going to pass it, knowing they're loving to rotate these 3 guys. Mark Andrews, if you take him, you're really waiting on one of the other 2 to be injured because he's going to be up and down. The guy I'm targeting, Drake, and I'm getting him almost every draft now, is Kyle Rudolph. Mm-hmm. He's playing in Kubiak's scheme, which is great for tight ends because of, again, what we talked about earlier. There's always the threat of the run or the pass. Who's usually covering the tight end? The guy responsible for the run, the linebacker. So when play action and these boots and all these things happen, the person that is the most impacted by that is a lot of times the guy covering the tight end. And so it's just an immediate advantage for Kyle Rudolph. The other thing is they're not running as much 11 personnel. That means Kirk Cousins loves to throw to the inside, has done it his whole career. Jamison Crowder, Jordan Reed, that's where he likes to operate. So now if Adam Thielen's not going to be in the slot as much, competing for those targets, Kyle Rudolph could really surprise people. He could really surprise people. I mean, I've got him right now, Drake. Hang on, let me look back over at my projections again. On Kyle Rudolph, I have got him. Hang on. I've got him at 16% of the targets. That's 67 catches, 670 yards, and 5 touchdowns. That's his median. It won't surprise me, though, if he were to get to 75 catches for 750 and 6 or 7, that's well within his range. And so even at his median, though, where you get him, that's a top 12 tight end, Drake. That's going to be, if you look at those points, that's 196 points in a premium. That's 162 in a regular PPR, a half point. That's 129, and a non-PPR, that's 95. That's top 12 in pretty much all. I think that's top 12, actually. That's for sure top 12 in all of those formats, over the last several seasons. So, and he has upside to finish in the top 6 or so because of the efficiency he's going to gain from this offense. And I hear people talk about Irv Smith. Again, Irv Smith, yes, is getting on the field in the 12 personnel sets, but he's not taking Kyle Rudolph off of the field. So Irv Smith and Chad Beebe are essentially between 12 and 11 personnel. They're kind of the guys competing to be the 4th guy in the passing attack for the Vikings.
Give me a sleeper tight end. Say you're going to take a backup or you miss out on the big guys and, you had to take Rudolph or Njoku or Delaney Walker. are you maybe looking at an older guy like a Jimmy Graham and Greg Olsen, or are you looking for somebody young like Chris Herndon, who's got a suspension, Dallas Goedert, Waller over there with the Raiders? Who do you like as a sleeper tight end?
Again, it's all about roster construction. If I miss on Kyle Rudolph, I'm probably going to try to get 2 of those guys. Now, if it's not, a deep bench league and I can only get 1, I'm going to swing for the upside first, and then I'm going to figure it out after week 1. I'm going to see if something pops. So I'm going to go with Waller or I'm going to go with Hawkinson. But in leagues where I've got room, I quite often only draft 1 quarterback. I rarely draft 2 quarterbacks.
Sure.
Now, you have to know your league. Exactly. But most people don't do this. Most people draft 2 or 3, and then that quarterback is what they release week 1 to go make the pickup of whoever pops. So what I try to do is add as many more people that could potentially pop in week 1, and then not worry about taking the other quarterback. I'll just take one whenever I need to. And if I go really late at quarterback, I just pick some that I like their schedule right out of the gate. But whenever I think about the tight ends, if I've got to choose one, Drake, I'm going to go upside. So I'd rather go Darren Waller or TJ Hawkinson. What I really want to do is pair Hawkinson or Darren Waller with a Jimmy Graham or a Greg Olsen. Heck, I'll even pair Waller and Hawkinson with Kyle Rudolph when it works out the correct way for, the roster.
Speaking of quarterbacks, let's switch over to your quarterback plan. Has anything changed? I know we're talking about waiting on the quarterback, that it's just the mantra in the fantasy business these days, but it's true because the advantage, unless, you have a freak year like Patrick Mahomes last year, the advantage isn't that different from, the quarterback 3 to quarterback 13. It really isn't in points per game. So when people say, I'm going to take Patrick Mahomes in the second round, like, if you're in a normal scoring league, pump the brakes on that, all right? So give me a couple of quarterback targets and then maybe a late round sleeper.
Yeah, I mean, and people can go back and listen to the original draft plan. I think we do not a lot's changed with quarterbacks, but here's what I'm going to say. A little bit has changed because Cam Newton is now dealing with an injury and Andrew Luck is gone. Mm-hmm. So that pushes other players up. Before, the plan that we had laid out for folks is just wait. But if you get into a sweet spot and you really want to have one of the guys that we believe have that elite upside, your targets are Carson Wentz and Cam Newton. Well, now you got to downgrade Cam Newton a little bit. Ron Rivera's come out and said he's a lock. He's going to play. But when you have a big guy like that, Drake, 260 pounds, and we're dealing with the word foot strain or foot sprain, and that can mean many things.
If it's a mid-foot sprain, that's Liz Frank, and that's bad news.
Exactly. That worries me because Cam Newton, so much of his value is tied up in running. And I hate it because Cam had been my number one target. I own him on, I don't have it in front of me, but it's over half of my rosters. He's my QB. He's my QB1. And in many cases, like I said, I'm not carrying another. So, I mean, I've got to work my waiver wire before the season starts potentially. But Cam Newton now, I think he still belongs there. And if he falls a little bit in drafts, he's still a guy that I like targeting. But, man, coming out of the gate in week 1, now that tier is really just Carson Wentz. Now, Jameis Winston is right there on the edge of being in it as well. And so before I was Wentz, Newton, and then Winston, was right on the edge. And then you had your other guys that I still like. Like, I'm fine with Russell Wilson. I'm fine with Drew Brees. I'm fine with Jared Goff. The point is you're still not going to be cut off. But if you're really trying to swing for the fences and kind of, you hear the term thrown around, that perfect draft, before my perfect draft was I was adding Cam Newton or Carson Wentz to this major arsenal of receivers and runners, right? And then I was turning around with a guy like Kyle Rudolph, or I already had Vance McDonald on my team. So from a perfect draft perspective, your margins for error, if you're wanting to hit a big upside quarterback late, is now smaller because the tier just includes Wentz. And then Winston's your backup, but you're not going to be as crazy about, Winston as you are Wentz.
Let me give you a free play here for week 1 DraftKings. If you want a dirt cheap quarterback, you're going to punt the position. Matt Stafford, $5,400 at the Arizona Cardinals. That defense is lost. Patrick Peterson isn't going to be there. Everyone just assumes they're going to run the ball like they're playing in leather helmets. Just tuck that one away.
No, Matt Stafford actually is a player that he may, and I tweeted about this like a few days ago because I watched that game because they actually played their starters for a good portion of the game last week.
Imagine that.
He looked good, and I would argue right now, Drake, he's got the best weapons he's had since Calvin left, right? None of them, this is a perfect example of complementary parts. None of them is elite. Kenny Galladay is not elite, but he's good. Marvin Jones is not elite, but he's good.
Mm-hmm.
TJ Hawkinson is not elite yet. He's going to be, but he's already good. You know, Kerryon Johnson can catch the ball out of the backfield. You know, you've got, Ty Johnson, who they'll also use out of the backfield. He's got, Danny Amendola, man, he looked good in that game. He played a lot out of 11, so he's got guys that can work every area of the field. And yeah, Darrell Bevell has been heavier to the pass, in the past. And we know that's why Matt Patricia hired him, because he wants to be more run heavy. So that's going to happen. But I think Matt Stafford has some sneaky potential efficiency because he's a veteran quarterback. He knows how to read defenses. And at this point, he's going to have 3 to 4 weapons on the field at all times that are good enough to demand attention, meaning someone somewhere is getting a mismatch. And I do think Stafford's good enough to figure that out and find it. The other guy and we talked about him last week, Drake, so we don't spend a lot of time on him, but it's Sam Darnold. Same kind of thing, a younger guy, but he's going to have 3 or 4 players on the field at all times that all complement each other very well. And all he's got to do is just figure out which one has the mismatch. And they all have the ability to win in certain scenarios, whether it's Robbie Anderson, Jamison Crowder, whether it's Quincy Enunwa, when you get Chris Herndon back, and then you've got Le'Veon Bell working underneath. That's a lot to like. And the guy looks like he's, it's still against vanilla defense type stuff in the preseason. But all you can ask for him is to do what he's done, and he's looked good in every game. So from that perspective, Sam Darnold, Matt Stafford, those are definitely late round guys, and other examples of why I don't mind streaming quarterback and I don't mind waiting.
All right, you got a draft on Saturday night. Who are a couple of players that you have to walk out of that draft room with, regardless of ADP? Who do you just walk in and you go, these guys are going to be on my roster, I don't care?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are several guys, that we can talk about, but one that I'm finding on my roster quite often, Drake, in the 3rd round, and I don't want to say that this is a you have to, but it just works out a lot. And you know who it is. I mean, you just took him, I believe, but it's Devonta Freeman. Mm-hmm. Freeman's going to be playing a great offense. He really should be a late 2nd round pick. Maybe even a mid-2nd round pick. I have he and Damian Williams together, but Damian Williams doesn't typically fall to the end of the 3rd or late, in the 3rd, whereas Devonta Freeman is pretty much every single draft. He's going to be on the field as a receiver. He's going to be on the field as a runner. And again, he's got a great quarterback. He has other weapons that take the heat off of him. So Freeman's just a guy that, I love ending up with. If you start moving more into, the middle rounds, of your draft, a guy that is really, getting a lot of buzz, but his ADP hasn't over-responded yet. And I pretty much come away with one of these 2 guys every draft, Drake. It's either DJ Moore or Curtis Samuel. Mm-hmm. And I still like both of them. I haven't been drafting them every draft over the last couple just because I've been waiting to hear a little bit more, about Cam Newton. But those are guys that I'm definitely targeting heavily, that I own a lot of shares of. Another guy that I'm going to walk out of this guy, out of almost every draft with this guy, and it's Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And it's kind of cool, Drake, because the Packers just haven't used their starting offense much this preseason. In fact, we haven't seen Aaron Rodgers, but we've seen enough. Marquez Valdes-Scantling is the guy that's on the field all the time with Devontae Adams. So think about it. When the Packers go to 21 personnel, which they're going to be in a lot because this is David LaFleur, he loves the stuff he did with Kyle Shanahan. Last year, LaFleur did not run a ton of 11 personnel. So Geronimo Allison is going to be in trouble. But Scantling, think about this. So in 21 personnel, Jimmy Graham's not on the field as the tight end. It's Mercedes Lewis. What is he? He's a run blocker. So every time
Jimmy Graham's embarrassing, by the way. Go on Twitter and look this up and look up some of Jimmy Graham's run blocking. It's funny.
It's bad. It is. And so that's why Mercedes Lewis gets on the field. So, but think about this. So now when you're in that package and you do pass, Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Devontae Adams, Scantling he's the 2nd option every time they do that. There's really Aaron Jones is going to be the 3rd option when they do that because, from Mercedes Lewis is not going to be one of the primary reads. you could argue that Jimmy Graham, if he's out there, he's going to more likely be in the progression, right, as someone Aaron Rodgers is going to be looking for. So in those looks, I mean, Scantling and a lot of those looks are going to be max protects, taking deep shots down the field. Guess what? That's what Scantling can do. So I'm walking out of every single draft with Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And his ADP remember early in the offseason, Drake, we liked him, and it got up. It was in around 13, 14. And then it jumped up into the 8th round. I started to see him go in the 7th rounds. It's cooled off just a little bit. He's still sitting there right in the 8th round. Man, that's a great time to grab Marquez Valdes-Scantling. Absolutely always going to be walking away with him. I'm going to be walking away with 2 running backs from the tier that we talked about earlier. I will walk away with 2 out of Matt Breida, Alexander Mattison, Darwin Thompson, Tony Pollard, and Justice Hill. I'm going to have 2 of those every single draft that I do. Sometimes you may have 3. I think we've hit on most of the others. I'm going to own Kyle Rudolph, quite a bit. There are a ton of other players that we love, Drake, and we've talked about them. I will say another guy that I'm feeling better and better about is Leonard Fournette. Man, I know early on in the offseason I projected him for quite a few catches, and I remember a lot of folks being like, oh, that is never going to happen. He's not going to catch all those balls. And remember we talked about, well, TJ Yeldon's gone. Nick Foles is prone to checking the ball down. He doesn't have a high threshold for something causing him to check the ball down. And no one is challenging Leonard Fournette right now to be the 3rd down back. So if Fournette is healthy, man, talk about a guy that has a path to 285, 300 rushes that's not very impeded and could end up, Drake, we could be surprised. The guy could end up with 60, 70 targets.
There's going to be a guy who starts his draft, Saquon Barkley, and it comes back around, and then he takes, I don't know, let's say Mike Evans, and then boom, you get Fournette as your RB2, and you're just rocking and rolling, man. You're off to the races, cooking with gas. Any cliche you want to use, because like we said, yeah, he's got top 5 upside if he can stay healthy.
Yeah.
Let me ask
you. The third, it's nice. I like it in the 3rd. I've still got him right below Freeman, but man, I'm very comfortable, with taking him there. But sorry, go ahead. You're about to ask something.
Well, I'm saying we're getting down near the end here. Let's talk about some guys that you're not going to take. I've got guys every draft I just look at and I go, nah, I'm not taking that guy. For whatever reason, you just don't take him. For me, I look at the running back tier and I don't know. There's just guys I don't get excited about. The Tampa Bay guys I'm not super excited about. The Miami guys now I'm not super excited about. It's a mess. Washington, they're just bad teams. I'm trying to avoid those situations. How about you? Who are you looking at and you go, nah, I'm good?
Yeah, and for folks that didn't listen to the draft plan, it's about having your tiers right. If you find yourself constantly saying that, your tiers aren't tight enough. You need to rework them because if they're in a tier and you're not willing to take them, you need to think through that because you either could just be wrong and you've got some bias you don't know about, and that's not always terrible, or B, you really shouldn't be thinking that way, right? And maybe you should consider them more. But to your point, Drake, guys that I'm not taking, and a lot of this is about ADP, but I'm not touching Tariq Cohen at his ADP. I'm just not, even in a full-on PPR, just because now I've got the presence of David Montgomery, plus I've got Mike Davis, and Tariq Cohen lived on the big plays last year.
I don't think I've ever drafted Tariq Cohen. You just look at me and go, the guy's got to catch like 6 balls a week to be relevant.
Yeah, and it's a price thing, right? The other guy I'm not drafting is his backfield mate. It's David Montgomery. And here's why. Same thing. There's 3 backs, and they're all going to get work. Now, even if David Montgomery, let's say, Drake, just kicks Mike Davis out of his role completely, yeah, then you get some more upside. But where you're having to take him right now, you've got to take him pretty much in the 4th round, and sometimes it's early 4th round. I feel like your ROI is limited because he's never going to replace Tariq Cohen. He doesn't. Miles Sanders has a better shot, and as much as I talk about Doug Peterson, Miles Sanders has a better shot at being the complete 3-down back than David Montgomery does because Tariq Cohen is so special as a mismatch piece. Jordan Howard's a nice player, But if Miles Sanders can get his act together and stop jumping past, jump cutting past the hole that's right in front of him, and just start taking the lanes that are there behind a great offensive line and a really good offense, I could see a path where Miles Sanders could actually, all of a sudden, you come week 6, 7, or 8, and we talked about him in the draft plan. If you construct your roster right, there's a plan where you can take him, and all of a sudden, week 8, he becomes your league winner. I just don't see that for David Montgomery. He needs Tariq Cohen to get hurt. Miles Sanders could still take the job over and just show improvement. So David Montgomery is another guy that I'm just not taking, Drake. If we continue, and some of this is about ADP. Mark Ingram's another guy that at ADP I just don't take. Why? The Baltimore Ravens are multiple. They use multiple people at every position besides quarterback. And even today we saw some hint, Trace McSorley's got a future. That's so funny. But David Montgomery, Tariq Cohen, Mark Ingram, those guys are all going to be splitting. I don't see Mark Ingram getting over 45% of the work. If we look at the way that this team was ran, and if you even go back to Greg Roman's years, in San Francisco, and what he did with some of his runners there, they like to use a committee. And it's just a price thing for me. I actually like Mark Ingram, Drake, but if I got to take him in the 4th round or early 5th, I've just got other plans. I honestly would rather have Austin Eckler in the 6th. And then circle back around with somebody else that's a floor option in the 9th or 10th round versus having to take Ingram, in the 4th round.
All right. It's the 16th round. You're about 9 beers deep. You're staring at the stickers, wondering who the hell's left. Let's find a Mr. Irrelevant here. Who's a guy to take a shot on with the last pick in the draft? I got 2 guys, and they're actually on the same team. We'll give you one of them, Dare Ogbunk. I'm going to F this up bad. Ogunbowale. He's a pass-catching back from Tampa Bay. So this is a guy who could be a 3-down back because, as you know, the 2 guys they have now, can't catch a cold. So if this kid can carve out a role as a 3rd down back, we've seen it in those Bruce Arians offenses. He kind of likes that Bruce Ellington type guy. Could be something. You never know. Worst things to take a flyer on. And lastly, Brashad Perriman, because Perriman is a guy who is going to start on the outside opposite of Mike Evans if you kick in Godwin to the slot. So he's going to just be running down the field, just getting bombs thrown to him all day. Maybe he's a handcuff to Mike Evans of sorts. So 2 guys that I'm just looking at, same team. They're going to have to throw the ball a ton. PPR league special. You need some points. Those are 2 guys I like. What do you like real late in a draft?
Yeah, I think those are good. I'm Perriman in a best ball. I'm willing. My problem for him is there's no way he's really going to see over 10% of the targets, so he's going to be really tough to start. But I'm totally with you on the logic. If I were to pick 2 that just really are hardly being drafted unless you're in a super deep draft right now, one would be John Ross. Yes, he's been hurt in the preseason, but right now we have no AJ Green. Tyler Boyd can't do everything. And so this is, an installation of what the Rams did. And so I still believe that there is an opportunity for John Ross to flash early in the season and potentially provide some value. And then all of a sudden, and this happens all the time, guys that, they're hurt all the time. All of a sudden they're healthy for a whole season. If John Ross does that, he has a really good shot at, turning into something, to help out your wide receiver core because we've got injuries with AJ Green and there's nobody else to really step up besides Tyler Boyd. The other guy is going to be Deebo Samuel for the 49ers, and that's just because, with Pettis starting, it just can't seem to get everything on track. If I had to place a chip on another guy to step up, it's probably Deebo. Now, I'm not against it being Marquise Goodwin. So here's a sneaky thing on Marquise Goodwin, Drake, that I didn't see reported anywhere. But last week, the 49ers, that it was their dress rehearsal. Some teams in the 3rd week, it's funny, used to remember Drake in the days when it was so simple. The 3rd week was a dress rehearsal for everybody. And we knew what it meant. Now, every team, and I wrote an article on this, the RSP, how to think about, understanding does the preseason matter? And it's basically, there's a lot of variables, so people can go check that out. But with the 49ers, it was their dress rehearsal. The interesting thing on Marquise Goodwin, he played every snap of the first drive, Drake, and then they put him in bubble wrap. Took him off. They did
their guy last year. If you remember, he was getting drafted in like the 3rd or 4th round.
Yeah, and remember because the year before, he and Jimmy G went crazy. And so last year when he wasn't hurt, I do want to say Marquise Goodwin showed progress as a receiver. I thought he had turned the corner from just being a speed guy to being a guy that could do, now he wasn't, a guy that can do everything, but he had opened up other additional areas, to his game. So those guys are definitely worth, thinking about late. Now, another guy that's starting to get a little more traction right now, but folks should be considering, and honestly, he almost belongs in the tier of the guys that I talked about before at runner, but it's Malcolm Brown. And this is about what the Rams haven't done this
Nobody talks
preseason.
about him. You're right.
They're not playing him. So the starters for the Rams every week have pretty much just sat. Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, usually the tight ends, Cooks, Goff, Gurley. They're not playing. Guess who else isn't playing? Malcolm Brown.
And they went out and they matched his restricted free agent offer sheet. So they obviously want him, need him, and he is the handcuff to Todd Gurley. Everybody wants to tout Darrell Henderson, but and we should have been touting Darrell Henderson, but you have to take the information and react to it. Mm-hmm. What we're seeing from Darrell Henderson, and I charted this again last week, when he runs inside zone, Drake, he struggles. Whenever he's running outside zone, he's even struggling. His best carries are on power. So I got a pulling guard of some sort, or I've got an isolation with a fullback leading the way, or a toss where I've got a tackle jumping outside. When he's given the option just to follow someone like that, he does really well. When he's asked to basically pick the hole based on reading a couple levels of the defense, he's struggling, and it's not just to do with his blocking in the preseason. Some of that has been bad, but even some of the penetration we're seeing, he's just freezing up, whenever really, he shouldn't be. He should still be processing and at least trying to get 0 yards instead of negative yards. So Darrell Henderson is a guy that the arrow's down. What that's telling me is that if for some reason Todd Gurley goes down, I think Henderson will still be the complementary back because he's going to be the receiver. But if Gurley has to be managed and shut down for games at a time, or for some reason Gurley goes down, I think Malcolm Brown is going to really be the guy to benefit the most. All right. Final thoughts. I'm going to start it off. Good luck, everybody out there. And if you've reviewed our show and you were lucky enough to get one of Dwain's draft tier emails, we'd love to see those. So anybody out there who listens to the show, send us your rosters. Tweet those at us. We'd love to see how we've affected your draft plan. And, we'll give you a review on it, or, I don't know, give you a thumbs up or a like or something like that. Whatever. We just want to interact with you. Let us know that you're listening.
We'll review your review.
Yeah, seriously. We'll just, as I'm drinking a beer on a Friday night, I'm like, thanks for listening, buddy. But so here's all I want to say. Have fun. Enjoy a live draft if you've got it. There is nothing better in fantasy football than a live draft with your friends. Cherish those moments because you really don't know how long you'll have them. I had a best friend of mine who was in my league, and he was killed in a car accident, so obviously he is no longer there. So enjoy those times. Have a blast. Bust everyone's balls. Drink some beers. Get home safe. Use an Uber or a Lyft or whatever you got to do. Get all home safe. And take your guys. Fantasy football is supposed to be fun. Okay, we give you all our cheat sheet stuff, and there's a lot of really nerdy content, but take the guys that make you feel good and that you're going to enjoy watching on Sundays. Dwain, what do you think? Final thoughts for the friends out there who are hustling this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think you hit the nail on the head with it. I just had my 2 big home league drafts where I host them here at my house this last weekend.
Oh, that's cool.
And yeah, so they're both like Dynasty, IDP, Superflex. They've been going for, quite a long time. And man, I was so excited. In my first one, I got Darwin Thompson in the second round. So I get just as excited about everybody else. Love getting to take, like you said, your guys, the ones you're excited about. But the other thing is just what you said, just getting to have all those guys here together. We have a good time. We all give each other a hard time. We drink a few beers, we kick back and relax. We get up when the draft's over and we all stare at who all picked who and give each other a hard time. And, we just have a good time with it. So I'm totally with you. And it's like you said, just cherishing those moments because, it's something where you don't ever know, you don't know if you're going to see that person again. You're not going to, leave the room just worried and thinking about that. But at the same time, enjoy it, cherish it, just like you said. One last note on the fantasy side that I would say, because we didn't get to it tonight, we didn't walk really through what the first half of a draft would look like. So we talked about really the flexibility at runner if you're picking at the end and how that could really make it more beneficial to think receiver potentially. But if you are drafting at the front end, going runner is still a very good idea. So say you came away with, McCaffrey, and then say, you came back and you ended up with, Freeman and Fournette, whatever the case may be. That's still really solid. The one thing that I would just advise you to do is just go back and rework through your wide receiver tiers, because like I talked about at the beginning of the show, some of those guys that we felt really good about 2 and 3 weeks ago being your wide receiver 3, we don't feel as good about. But there are names that are jumping in that can replace them, such as Josh Gordon.
There he is.
We already talked about Marquise Valdes-Scantling should certainly be part of your plan. Curtis Samuel can be part of your plan, but just be prepared, because we don't feel as good about Dante Pettis. You don't feel as good about Christian Kirk, as we did, a couple of weeks ago. We didn't talk much about the Cardinals passing and receivers tonight, but those are guys that where they were almost like a lock. Yeah, fine, I'll take them as my wide receiver 3, a couple of weeks ago. You're not probably going to feel as good about it. And that's what working through these tiers is about. Force yourself to work through it and simulate what would this be like in the draft. That way you're not surprised and you're totally comfortable. And you've already moved Dante Pettis and Christian Kirk, a little bit down your board to where you're more comfortable with them. And now you're seeing more clearly and you're like, man, I went with the 3 receivers. So with my 3rd receiver pick or in my 5th or 6th round, I'm going to take Josh Gordon. So we didn't get to that. So you guys just make sure that you think that through. And like Drake said, have fun.
Yeah, sorry, folks, in the 90 minutes we've done here that we didn't get to talk about Josh Gordon, but, man, did we hit on a lot of great stuff. Dwayne, excellent work as always. You're killing it. This guy is the next big thing in fantasy. Make sure you're following him at Dwain McFarland on Twitter. I am at Drake Fantasy. Good luck, everybody out there. We appreciate you checking out The Hustle. And go kill it this weekend, guys. See ya.
This has been the Fantasy Football Hustle. We're back next week with all you need for waiver wire, trades, roster management, and more. Until then, never get out hustled.